I was standing ankle-deep in oil and moonlight when I first realized how far I'd come. The garage doors rattled in the late October wind. My hands hurt, scraped raw from hours coaxing life into a 400-horsepower relic most people would call a waste of space. For me, the 1967 Impala was the closest thing to a dream I'd ever owned. I could still remember the first ad I spotted online: sun-bleached fenders, blown transmission, and bullet holes in the hood. Most guys would have laughed and scrolled on. I couldn't look away. I saw not the rust, but the future behind those tired headlights. I bought it sight unseen, and then spent what felt like a lifetime saving every spare dollar, talking to old men at swap meets, and taking overtime at work just to afford the next part. When I moved into the new house, my first real house, the one I'd stayed up nights to afford, the Impala was the first thing I parked in that garage. I left boxes unpacked in the living room, ignored the tangled mess of wires and light switches that never seemed to work, and spent every spare minute under that hood. Nothing big in life has ever come easy for me. I've learned to keep detailed logs, file receipts, and treat every bolt and gasket with more respect than I get from half the people in my life. The neighbors didn't wave. The old guy across the street gave my project the evil eye every time he walked his dog. I tried to blend in fresh coat of paint on the mailbox, tried my best to keep the lot tidy, but nothing made me prouder than rolling open the garage and watching sunlight hit the Impala's chrome, even dull as it was. I met my girlfriend about 3 months after the house was mine. We bonded quickly, like people do when there aren't many local bars or events to pad out awkward silences. She moved in during the long spring, boxes of her own trailing behind her, bright scarves and scented candles overtaking my battered den. At first, she tolerated the car. I joked it was an extra roommate. She laughed, but I heard the edge in her voice when she called it your mess in the garage. She insisted it took up too much space. She wanted to park inside, not in the driveway. It's not that I was blind to her frustration. She liked order, perfect kitchen counters, rooms free of clutter, shoes lined up in rows. She sweep around the Impala, mumbling about grease spots or how she once nearly tripped over a loose starter. Each time she suggested that it was time to move on from the project, I'd shake my head and tell her that it was nearly done. She didn't get that it was never just a car. Letting go would never be that simple. Every night, once she'd gone to bed, I slipped outside to the cold concrete, the only place that still felt like it belonged to me. My fingers would find where old metal had been replaced. I'd think about my dad, about the quiet afternoons in his workshop before he lost interest in everything. Some nights I wondered if I was building something, or just refusing to let go of the only thing that proved I could create. There were arguments, her patience chipped away by compressor noise, and my refusal to clean up the piles of old wiring harnesses or compressor hoses. I kept careful logs in a battered notebook, receipts from eBay auctions, hand-drawn diagrams, catalog tier sheets with part numbers circled in red. The Impala wasn't only an investment for me. It was a record of hours when nothing else in my life was certain, except the weight of a socket wrench in my palm, and the natural order of reassembling something piece by piece. Looking back, I realize I ignored the warning signs too easily. She'd grow quiet when I talked about a new fuel pump or the feel of the bench seat after I finally fixed the springs. She'd bring up her family, her dad who kept everything immaculate, her sister who called my junk embarrassing when she visited. Still, I thought compromise was possible. I never imagined that loving this car, this piece of resurrected steel, could wind up costing me anything more than a few bruised knuckles and a strain on my Saturdays. That night, as I tightened a final bolt and wiped sweat from my brow, I allowed myself one long look at the car. The Impala seemed almost ready, a line crossed, a future within reach. But something in the house creaked behind me, and in my gut I felt the faintest chill, like a warning I couldn't quite name. Tomorrow, I hoped, would be another ordinary day. But the garage felt strangely empty, as if the air had shifted and something vital I'd worked for was already slipping through my grasp. She moved in with 2 overstuffed suitcases and a nervous smile. I could see her eyes dart immediately to the side door, the one that led into the garage, as if she already felt an itch beneath her skin. We did the dance that couples do, finding room in closets, rearranging furniture, arguing a little too sharply over which mugs to keep on the shelf. But beneath all that, the real struggle lurked just beyond the kitchen. The Impala, still stripped down onto jack stands, half its guts laid out on tarps. I tried to act casual when I caught her peering in at the mess, but I knew she hated it. Every time she passed the doorway, her lips thinned a little more. She started with small complaints. The smell of gas and metal seeped through the laundry room, she said. She tripped on my breaker bar one morning and left it on top of the washing machine, the handle smeared with pink lotion from her hands. Sometimes, when I worked late into the night, she'd stand in the doorway hugging herself, casting this shadow across the old Chevy's hood. If I tried to tell her how close I was to getting the engine back together, I'd get a nod and a quick change of subject. Questions about house paint or organizing the pantry, anything besides camshafts or transmission bolts. Her resentment edged in quietly at first, growing with every new part that arrived in another box. When the replacement quarter panels showed up and leaned against the wall for 2 weeks, she avoided the garage entirely. I started noticing her muttering under her breath when she thought I couldn't hear. Sometimes I'd find her TikTok open to cleaning accounts, her thumb scrolling fast and her jaw set. She wanted order, streamlined, sanitized, everything in its place. My project was the opposite. To her, it was chaos in the last corner of the house she couldn't claim. One Sunday, I heard her talking to her sister on speakerphone. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, her voice just carried through the kitchen. "It's like he cares more about that wreck than this relationship," she whispered. "It's not even worth anything, it's just junk." I stood around the corner, heart pounding, feeling smaller than I had in years. When she hung up, I tried again to explain what the car meant to me. Not just the money, but the time, the feeling of building something real. She gave me a look so tired and sharp that I fell silent. After that, she didn't bother hiding her annoyance. Every argument now circled back to the same point. The car was in the way, and by extension, so was I. She began to rearrange things while I wasn't looking. Tools I'd left precise for the next step would vanish into bins. Parts would be moved or stacked. My notes would get swept onto shelves behind mason jars and air fresheners. Each time I'd feel a little panic, like some essential part of my world was gone. Our nights soured. She demanded to know when the car would be finished, why her car had to sit in the gravel outside while mine hogged the clean, dry space. I argued that the Impala was almost whole, that we'd both use the garage soon. I clung to that as if finishing the car would magically fix everything. Sometimes I wondered if I was being stubborn. I tried giving her more space, finished wiring up LED lights above her side of the closet, cooked dinners, vacuumed the carpet, but nothing touched the chill that settled over us whenever the conversation drifted back to the Impala. Even in bed, she lay still and silent, the wall between us thicker every time metal clanged in the garage. The resentment finally settled between us like fog, permanent, choking, impossible to ignore. I could feel it every time I turned a wrench. I told myself she just needed to see it finished, shining, sold maybe, or driven down the road at last. But the longer she lived in that house, the clearer it became. To her, the Impala was more than an eyesore. It was a wedge, and something was shifting in her gaze every night she locked eyes with that car-shaped shadow behind the garage door. What I didn't see, what I would only understand when it was already far too late, was how close she was to doing something neither of us could ever undo. The business trip came at the worst possible time, not that there was ever a good one anymore. I could feel tension trailing me through the house as I packed. Every zipper tug, every motion seemed to clang against the raw wall of silence between us. She barely looked up from her phone. I asked twice if she'd help me find my blue work shirt, the one she'd once called my lucky charm. She just nodded toward the laundry basket, then disappeared into the kitchen. There was no goodbye kiss, only the scrape of her mug against the counter as I rolled my bag to the front door. I told her I'd only be gone 2 nights. I left her a list with emergency numbers cleared off the coffee table and reminded her about the mail and the trash. When I finally stopped rambling, she stared at me like I was missing some point. "Maybe I'll finally get some use out of the garage," she said dryly. I forced a chuckle, but her eyes didn't soften. The words stung harder than I admitted, and I promised myself things would get easier when I got home and could put my head down and finish the car. The drive out of town felt different from all the trips before. The house receded in my rear view, and I caught myself glancing at the phone, half expecting another complaint, another guilt trip about her parking in the gravel. Instead, just silence. At the hotel, I FaceTimed her to check in. She turned the camera so I only saw the kitchen cabinets. The background chatter of the TV filled the gaps in our conversation. She was short with me, talking more about a neighbor's leaf blower than anything we cared about. I hung up early, unsettled and restless, packing the room, feeling like I was stranded 1,000 miles away rather than a couple of hours. That first night, I wondered what she was really thinking as she moved in the silent house without me. I couldn't shake the feeling I was missing something slipping quietly between the spaces we'd once filled with laughter. Even as I tried to focus on my job, my mind wandered back home. Every time I thought of the garage, of the tools carefully laid out, the engine half covered beneath its old blanket, I felt the sort of ache you get when you dream about losing your teeth. Helpless, small, out of control. When I called her the next day, she barely answered before announcing she was fine, just busy, and that she'd finally managed to pull her car into the garage. She laughed a thin, chilly laugh that chilled me even through the phone. I asked her how she managed to fit it in with all the junk in the way. There was a long pause, but she dodged the question, saying only that she'd figured it out. I pressed a little, something crawling sharp and cold up my spine, but she changed the subject again. I didn't sleep that night. My head spun with every possible scenario, nothing truly terrible, just the growing certainty that when I came home, something would be different. The next morning, the ache in my gut told me things had changed behind my back. The whole drive home, I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. But as I turned onto my street, creeping past garbage cans and empty yards, the quiet dread inside me sharpened into panic. I had no idea how right I was to fear the silence waiting in my own garage. Every sense was razor sharp as I pulled into the driveway. Something was wrong, so wrong I could taste it on the air. My girlfriend's car sat perfectly centered in the garage, cozy in the spot where the Impala had always dominated the view. I popped the trunk and walked past her car, refusing to look straight ahead. I fumbled for the light switch. Muscle memory told me the Impala should have blocked my way, but my eyes met a stretch of cold, naked cement. My heart hammered. I scanned every inch of the garage, disbelief slamming into me. The project was gone. Not just the body, but the boxes of labeled parts, the stacks of chrome hardware, the battered clipboard holding 2 years of receipts. Even the oil stains where I'd hunched for months looked cleaner, scrubbed by someone who wanted to erase all evidence the car had ever existed. I dropped my duffel and staggered backward. My mind split trying to process what I was seeing. No tires leaning against the wall, no shape beneath a tarp, not even the shadows were right. I backed into the kitchen, my breathing shallow, searching for the only explanation that made sense. Maybe there had been a break-in, some disaster. She was at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, legs crossed like nothing at all had shifted in our universe. She looked up at me and flashed a bright, practiced smile, the kind you'd use on a stranger. "I'm glad you're home. See, I can finally use the garage now." Something inside me cracked. I tried to keep my voice level. "Where's my car?" I could barely get the words past my teeth. Her smile froze, then faded as if she'd been rehearsing this moment and finally ran out of lines. She shrugged too casually. "Oh, I had some guys haul it away. The whole mess is gone. I told you I needed that space." I stared at her, the shock rooting me in place. It felt like I was staring at a stranger, someone who could carve away everything I'd built and not even flinch. My hands trembled as I pressed for details, but she just rolled her eyes. It was taking up room, it looked like junk, and you never finished it. I figured you'd thank me eventually. My throat clenched. That was my car, you had no right. She turned defensive. You never listened, you never cared what I needed. You loved that car more than me, and I was sick of living in a mess. The words came tumbling out, about respect, about years of sweat and money, about how this wasn't her choice to make. But she only got colder, her jaw clenching each time I tried to make her understand. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look guilty. Instead, she stood up and went to her room, slammed the door in my face. I think that's when the rage set in. It wasn't just about metal and glass anymore. It was about betrayal that ran so deep I thought my skin would split open. I followed her down the hall, demanded to know who she'd called, what they'd taken, where she'd sent the Impala. I don't even remember half the words I said. Voices echoed off the walls, louder and louder, my anger scorching through every memory we'd made in this house. She barked at me to calm down, said it was done now, and that if I loved her, I'd get over it. She packed a bag before I finished shouting. I told her I wanted her gone tonight forever. For the first time since we'd met, she looked afraid but still too proud to say a word of regret. As the front door banged shut behind her, the silence that settled on the house was suffocating. My hands shook as I flipped frantically through my phone, searching for numbers, junkyards, police, anyone who might help. Somewhere in the mounting dread was a realization that cut even deeper than the loss itself. She hadn't just thrown out a car. She tried to erase part of who I was. But as I stared out at the empty garage, I promised myself this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. In that moment, I still didn't know how far I'd have to go to get justice, or what else I'd have to lose to reclaim what was stolen from me. The house felt colder with every step I took, as if her absence had sucked out the last scrap of warmth. I wandered back into the garage, where the emptiness pressed on my chest so hard I could barely stand. I wanted to scream until my voice broke. Instead, I gripped the edge of the workbench and breathed. Rage pulsed through me so wildly it made my vision blurry. I thought of the years I spent saving, the hours I'd lost to sweat and bruised knuckles just to bring my dream within reach. That car had been my heart and all the hope that things could get better. Now, with a single stroke, she decided it was just rubbish to be carted away. Between flashes of fury, a second feeling pushed up, numbness, like someone had cut a wire deep inside. In my mind, I replayed the conversation over and over. How smug she'd looked, how certain she was that getting rid of the Impala would solve her problems. How easy it had been for her to make a decision that stole years of my work because she was annoyed, because my passion didn't fit her idea of a neat life. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't forgive it, but guilt wormed in anyway. Part of me wondered if I had missed 1,000 warnings, if I'd really chosen a car over a future. Was I the one who'd made all this inevitable? I wandered the house, haunted by the ghosts of our last arguments, her sharp looks, my angry words. I sat on the end of the bed, clutching my phone, reading through old texts as if any of them could explain what she'd done. My friends would never believe it. As I typed out the story, struggling to find words for what the car meant to me, and what losing it felt like, I started to see how quickly the world would judge me. They wouldn't understand why I cared this much. I could imagine their shrugs. It was just some rust bucket, man. Move on. It's not worth your sanity. But letting go felt like erasing the only proof that I built anything at all in this life. Every time I saw my own reflection in the window, I saw someone who had been robbed, humiliated in his own home. Part of me wanted to set fire to what was left and just walk away, to be the bigger person, to keep the peace and forget I ever poured myself into that project. But each time I tried to imagine letting her get away with it, my blood boiled hotter. I'd traded respect and trust for silence before. Doing that now would rip apart whatever dignity I still had. That night sleep wouldn't come. I scrolled through old receipts, hundreds of photos, proof of every stage of the rebuild. I saw my own hands, dirt ground and proud, holding up pieces of an engine that should have run again long after I was gone. Rage twisted into something colder and sharper, resolve. I couldn't make her understand or care or even regret what she'd done, but I could make sure she faced the consequences. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been told their passion was worthless. My phone buzzed with new messages from her sister, angry, defensive, telling me to move on. It's just a car. Don't ruin her life over this. Her friends piled on, as if I was being petty, as if she was the real victim for being held accountable. I stared at each message until my jaw ached. The injustice of their words made me feel lonelier than I'd felt in years. I started a new note and began to list everything missing: VIN, serial numbers, receipts, photos, all the proof I'd need. I rehearsed what I'd say when I filed the police report, when I called my lawyer, when I faced down everyone who'd try to convince me justice wasn't worth it. This wasn't just about money. It was about standing up for what mattered, even if I had to do it alone. Anger gave way to a kind of grim energy. I would not go quietly. I would not be erased. As the sky tipped into dawn, I gathered every scrap of documentation and made a list of calls I'd make the second the world woke up. I had no idea what was coming next, but as I looked at the empty spot in my garage, I knew one thing for certain: I was going to fight. And there was no turning back, no matter how ugly things got. By sunrise, it was clear that what happened in my garage wasn't going to stay between the two of us. I woke up to a phone lit up with notifications, texts from numbers I didn't recognize, missed calls from her mother, a barrage of messages from mutual acquaintances. Each one was another small punch to the gut, each voice angling for sympathy or outrage, but always against me. Her mother left the first voicemail, her tone saccharine with cold fury. She wanted to know if I was really throwing away years of love over some heap of metal. She told me it was time to grow up, to be a man and let things go. Her daughter, she insisted, only did what was right. Her sister was bolder. She sent paragraphs. She called the Impala an eyesore and a hazard. She accused me of letting my pride override any love I claimed to have. She even hinted that I needed professional help. Her friends took to social media, tagging me in posts about men who care more about objects than people. Some who'd barely set foot in our house parroted the claim that I'd neglected my relationship for months, more obsessed with junk and grease stains than actual connection. Each message left me angrier but also more isolated. It was like they all saw her as heroic, cleaning up the mess, solving a problem, casting herself as a martyr who'd done all she could. Walking through town, I felt the shift in how people glanced at me. Our mutual friends suddenly dodged eye contact or sent quick, heartless texts. "Hope you can work things out, man. Don't take it to court, it's not worth it." As if suing for the car was worse than losing it. She meanwhile made sure her side was heard. Her story hit everyone who'd listen. She just wanted peace, order, a functional home. I was the stubborn roadblock, incapable of compromise. Even some of my own friends began to question if I'd overreacted. "Bro, you really going to sue her over this?" one asked, as if I'd snapped over a dented lawnmower, not a year and a half of my life. The pressure was relentless. Her family kept calling, sometimes alternating between guilt trips and veiled threats. Her aunt dropped by unannounced and tried to talk sense into me about men's egos and what truly matters. She left a pie on the porch, as if butter and sugar could fix what she'd helped unravel. I closed the door and let it spoil. It stopped feeling like a breakup and started to feel like a siege. Every conversation primed to wear me down, to make me let go of my demand for justice. But nothing broke me. If anything, the pylon lit a fresh fire in my chest. With every text, every accusation, the truth became clearer. Nobody in her world ever saw the car as anything but junk, and they never wanted to see what it meant to me. There was no empathy, just a united front demanding I fall in line and swallow my pride. Sitting alone in the dark, I listened to their chorus of blame and realized exactly how alone I'd become. But if they thought shame would shatter my will, they didn't know me at all. Instead, I took every message, every call, and saved them as proof, evidence that always, someone will try to make you the villain when you refuse to let yourself be trampled. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the contact for the local police. If nobody else cared about what was stolen, it was time to find someone who would. The next step was going to turn the pressure up even higher, and there was no telling who would be left standing on my side when it was over. The moment I hung up on her cousin's ranting call, I pressed dial on my lawyer's number. My hands shook, but my voice came out steadier than I felt. I laid out the story, my car gone without my consent, my ex orchestrating the whole thing while I was miles away. My lawyer's tone changed as soon as I mentioned the theft, the documentation, the texts. He told me to list everything, gather receipts, title, photos, anything that could establish ownership. He was clear. This wasn't a dispute over a couch or a TV. Theft is theft, and intent didn't erase the law. I spent the rest of the morning digging through every drawer and folder in the house. I found the original title, battered but intact from years, in glove compartments and toolboxes. Every major part had a receipt, chrome bumpers, pistons, even the custom interior kits. My phone storage was crammed with dated photos, the Impala's body up on stands, VIN numbers glinting from under layers of dust, close-ups of rusted panels and fresh paint. I even found videos of myself turning the key on first tests. I backed everything up, screenshot every nasty message from her side, every vague threat masquerading as advice from her mother. When I finally marched into the police station, I felt stripped down but sharper somehow. I sat across from the officer and told him exactly what happened. My ex was not a co-owner, had no claim, never touched a wrench, wasn't on a single bill of sale. I dropped the paper stack onto the desk and watched his eyebrows go up. I showed them the VIN, the dated photos in my garage, text chains about the car, the insurance policy with my name, even social media posts tracking every stage of the restoration. I told them how she hired people to haul it away, how I knew which junkyards operated nearby, how I suspected one in particular, the same one I'd heard her complain about as being sketchy before. The officer asked direct, careful questions. Was I sure my ex had coordinated the removal? Did I have proof? I handed over the text where she wrote, "I did what needed to be done, you'll thank me. The garage is clear now." He nodded, typing notes, scanning evidence, his voice turning businesslike now that the mess was out of the realm of domestic drama and firmly in the territory of criminal theft. They made copies of everything. They said it might take time, hinted the scrapyard's management would not appreciate the attention. I felt adrenaline and dread swirling together. Every word out of my mouth pushed things further than either of us could take back. When I stepped back into my empty garage afterward, it felt less like a wound and more like a battlefield. For the first time, it was clear. Either I fought this all the way, or I learned to live with being walked over in my own home. Late that afternoon, my lawyer called. The police were following up immediately. It was out of my hands now, marching into the unknown with hard facts and cold anger as my only armor. I stood at the open garage door, arms crossed, waiting for the world to tilt again. The law was moving, and whatever they found next, there would be no room left for denial. I barely slept that night, the hours dragging by as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every sound in the house a threat and a memory. When my phone finally buzzed with an early morning update from my lawyer, my pulse jolted me upright. The police were acting on the complaint. They wanted me available to answer questions, to clarify details, to fill in any gaps about the Impala and the missing parts. I told them everything I knew. I gave precise lists, described the car's quirks, the little telltale marks I'd left from years of work. Every second felt like a test I couldn't afford to fail. By noon, I received a call from the officer leading the case. His voice was clipped, the background noisy. He told me they'd arrived at a local scrapyard not 10 miles from my house, the one I'd always avoided, a place rumored to deal in more than just honest recycling. I tried to keep my voice steady as I described the car again, spelled out the VIN, mentioned the hand-welded repairs, even down to the gouges on the dash left over from my first, clumsy attempts at restoration. The officer listened, then cut me off. "You better get down here." The drive to the junkyard was a blur, radio off, heart hammering, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The place looked worse than I remembered, muddy tire tracks crisscrossing the lot, half-crushed vehicles stacked behind fences topped with coils of razor wire. A patrol car flanked the entrance, lights flashing silently. I parked as the wind whipped grit against my face and pushed through the gate, flashing my ID at a uniformed officer. He nodded and waved me toward a row of battered shipping containers. A detective met me halfway, eyes cautious and serious. He asked me one more time to confirm the details, to describe the car, the parts that were missing, anything unique. I rattled off everything, voice shaking just enough to betray the hope clawing at my gut. He led me around the corner, and I spotted a faded blue tarp crowning a lumpy shape, barely wider than a pair of double doors. It took everything not to sprint forward. A uniformed officer squatted beside the tarp, clipboard in hand. The detective signaled, and together they pulled the cover away. Underneath, half disassembled but achingly familiar, sat the shell of my '67 Impala. The body panels were all there, scarred but unmistakable. I dropped to one knee, fingers tracing the shape of the front grille, my breath catching the moment I saw the VIN stamped near the firewall. It was mine. Against all odds, mine. My relief was poisoned quickly by what was missing, parts scattered on benches, labels torn, some sections already boxed up as if ready to vanish for good. A mechanic stood nearby, arms folded, eyes darting from the police to the detective and then to me, his jaw locked in a silent dare. The officers asked him pointed questions. He stammered and fumbled over his answers, claimed he'd only just received it, swore he had no idea it was stolen. But doubts prickled under every word. One look at the officers told me they weren't buying it. As the officers started snapping photos, dusting for fingerprints, logging the serial numbers, I watched one of them dial in the VIN on his phone. It came back registered to me. The detective's demeanor shifted. This was no longer a question of misunderstanding. It was criminal. He radioed for backup, murmured orders about evidence storage, and then, with an edge of finality, handcuffed the mechanic and led him away. Another officer logged every part they could find, while the manager, summoned from his office, blanched at the sight of police swarming the property. A sick satisfaction mixed with my grief. It was validation and loss all tangled in one. My phone lit up again, my lawyer, then the officer, double-checking the insurance, the bills of sale, every scrap of proof I'd collected laying the case bare. I could tell by their measured voices it would be a long process. Even so, just knowing the car was here, not crushed or stripped beyond hope, flooded me with relief sharper than any scorn her family could throw at me. As the sun slipped behind the battered fence line, the detective promised follow-up interviews and more paperwork. I left the junkyard with my hands stained from old grease and new dust. The car was in police custody, still caught between evidence and home. But now, there was no denying what had been done. And I knew, deep down, this fight was about to get even uglier before I'd see the Impala back under my own roof. The day after the police raid at the junkyard, I paced my living room with the restless energy of someone who just survived a tornado. The car was technically safe, for now, but the satisfaction I'd felt a few hours before was already turning bitter. All I could do was wait. The Impala was locked away by the police as evidence. My fingerprints wouldn't touch the steering wheel until they finished their investigation, and no one had a timeline for when that would be. A year and a half of progress, sealed off in chain-link limbo. Calls kept coming from the detective's office. They needed lists, diagrams, anything to help match the parts the junkyard had scattered, and to identify what was gone for good. I spent hours cataloging every piece from memory, bumpers, trim pieces, the center console that I'd painstakingly rebuilt one Saturday night while everyone else was out drinking. Some of it surfaced in police photos, stacked haphazardly on the mechanic's bench or shoved inside crates. But the rest? Maybe sold, maybe tossed in the back of someone's truck, maybe already gone in the night before the cops showed up. Every loss pulled me tighter, left me calculating impossible odds. Would there be enough left to rebuild, or was my project already dead, another ghost in a lineup of gutted classics? My lawyer called mid-afternoon, his tone pragmatic but careful. He explained the legal process, how criminal charges for theft were already moving forward, how I need to file a civil claim if I wanted restitution for damages, missing parts, months of lost labor. He walked me step by step through what the insurance might cover, what I could possibly recover from the junkyard if the court sided with me. But nothing would fix the sense that a line had been crossed, that something sacred had been ripped away while I wasn't looking. Complicating everything were the messages that still rolled in, now more poisonous than ever. Her family called me a monster for ruining lives over an old car. Some of her friends warned me that pressing charges meant everyone loses. Even mutual acquaintances tried to drag their way into my conscience, urging me to just drop it and move on. But I couldn't. Every word from them hardened my resolve. If I backed out now, I'd prove them right. I'd be just another man who lets someone else steal the thing he loves and shrugs it away. The detective's updates brought little comfort. The junkyard's employees had started clamming up, suddenly short on paperwork and memory. One had been arrested, but the others dodged charges, their stories paper-thin and constantly shifting. The implication haunted me. Someone had tried to vanish my car forever, and if the cops had shown up a single day later, maybe they would have succeeded. The sense of near-total loss was almost worse than if it had been completely destroyed. Late that night, I drove past the police impound yard. I could barely see the Impala through the cyclone fence and the dim orange streetlights, but just knowing it was there, battered, incomplete, lying in official limbo, twisted something raw inside me. There was no guarantee I'd get all the parts back, no clarity about how long the process would drag on, no promise I'd ever restore what that betrayal cost me. Every day after, some new piece of paper arrived. Subpoenas, notices, requests for more proof. My life became paperwork and would-be apologies, negotiations, and reminders that justice always came late if it came at all. The uncertainty pressed on. I tried to imagine what that garage would look like, months down the line. Would the Impala ever come home? Or would all that remained be the cold echo of what was stolen? Whatever happened, I understood this was only the beginning. I was caught in a battle where truths were easy to twist, and everyone's true character was about to be tested, mine included. As the case dragged on, the world beyond my front door seemed to shrink to the humming refrigerator, the ticking clock, and the glow of my phone screen. I'd underestimated just how much noise the story would make online after a friend, half as a joke, urged me to post the timeline on Reddit, looking for a fresh opinion untangled from family drama and small-town gossip. I hesitated at first, imagining more of the same ridicule, but deep down I needed to know if I was actually losing my mind for taking a stand. So with shaking fingers, I laid it all out. The year and a half of work, the shock, the betrayal, the legal scramble, the bitter fallout. Then I hit submit. The post exploded in hours. Notifications streamed in faster than I could process. Comments stacked up, each a judgment, a miniature verdict from people who knew nothing about me, nothing about her, nothing about the lives we'd led before this nightmare. But as I scrolled, patterns started to emerge, 6 tribes, each more certain than the last. First were the justice seekers. They came in swinging, their thumbs pressed firm on the scale in my favor. They spoke of boundaries and betrayal, how what she'd done was nothing short of theft, no matter her frustration or justifications. "You're right to sue," one person wrote. "It's the only way she'll understand. This isn't about an old car, it's about respect. If you let this go, she'll do it again, and so will everyone else who thinks they're entitled to call your dreams trash." Others called out the long-term harm of rolling over when someone erases you, how justice, late as it might be, was both a warning and a last defense. Their certainty fanned the fatting embers of my own resolve. For a moment, it felt like someone heard me. But standing opposite them were the forgiveness advocates, just as insistent that healing now mattered more than retribution. They wrote about love lost, about the costs of letting anger run your life, warning me I'd regret drawing the battle line so fiercely. Cars can be replaced. Friends and family can't, one warned. You have a chance to prove you're bigger than this. Don't let her mistake turn you into someone you are. Their words were softer, but heavy. They chipped at every doubt I carried in the silence after the garage went empty. Even as I rejected their premise, some part of me wondered if I'd let vengeance swallow me whole and leave nothing left to rebuild. The practical cynics drifted in next, rolling their eyes at both sides. This is why you never let anyone move in. Don't trust anyone with your stuff. These stories always end the same. If you left something people see as junk lying around, don't act shocked when it gets trashed. Others dug into the nuts and bolts of cohabitation, liability, insurance, even questioning the wisdom of investing so much emotion and money into an object that could, with a truck and some ignorance, be erased in a weekend. Cold, factual, unsentimental. Some points stung more than I cared to admit. Maybe I'd risked too much on something too fragile, and now I was paying for it. The car enthusiasts formed a defense line around me from the first sentence. Their outrage burned hottest of all. To them, what happened wasn't just theft, it was desecration. That car is a piece of history. What you did was restoration, not hoarding. One posted, listing points about vintage models, lost craftsmanship, the years it can take to find certain trim pieces. Others shared stories of their own, projects murdered by family who never understood what it meant to bring something old back to life. Their anger was the loudest, almost tribal in its loyalty. It reminded me I wasn't alone in how I grieved. Their validation mattered, a lot more than anyone else would understand. Yet alongside the tones of solidarity came the dubious doubters. They poked and prodded at the gaps in my account, searching for exaggeration or hidden fault. Did you ever tell her how much it meant? Was the garage really unusable, or did you pick fights over it? Why would she go to this extreme if things were healthy? Each question was barbed, a not-so-subtle push for me to shoulder some blame. Their logic was clinical, but every devil's advocate chipped away at my certainty. Was I blind to her side of the story until it was too late? Did my silence about my passion doom me? The final group, the legal eagles, dug into statutes, state property law, details of title and consent, comparing stories from their own cases. They were meticulous, practical, and sometimes ruthless. If your name on the title and she authorized the removal with no ownership, it's cut and dry. That's grand theft auto, not a lover's spat. Others argued nuances, whether her intentions mattered, what would happen if her family sued back, how to prepare for court. Their input was less emotional but maybe the most grounding. Lawsuits weren't stories. They had timelines, consequences, costs that lasted far beyond a Reddit thread or a family argument. With every scroll I locked deeper into a maze of judgment, empathy, disbelief, and brutal encouragement. I answered some people, ignored others, but their words circled in my mind long after the thread sank under the torrent of new posts. I started to see how public this disaster had become, transformed from private hell to an argument for the internet to take sides on. I realized I could win in court and still lose something I'd never get back, a sense of peace, or trust, or even the memory of why I started the rebuild in the first place. But as moderators locked the thread for civility reasons, and my inbox swelled with private messages, support, threats, job offers from car guys halfway across the country, I stared at the screen and finally felt what it meant to be on the edge. I'd asked the world for a verdict. Now it was time to see what the real one would be. The court date was coming, and the next time someone judged my story, it would be a lot more than karma on the line. Days after the thread faded from Reddit's front page, the noise settled into a low, steady ache that followed me everywhere. I could still taste the adrenaline, feel the phantom vibration of my phone in my pocket, as if the next judgment or insult or stray word could spark the whole mess again. The house was silent but for the hum of the fridge and the echo of shoes on tile. Where her laugh used to drift from the kitchen, there was only air. Even the garage, emptied of parts, cordoned as evidence, felt like it had lost its heart and its history. When I caught my face in the bathroom mirror, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. Lines I'd never seen before dragged down my eyes. There was no relief in having been right, no victory in the letter of the law. If anything, everything cost me more than I'd counted on: time, yes, and money and muscle and hope, but also a future I'd planned. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, turning the past over and over in my head, wondering at what exact second we'd lost each other for good. Was it when she first called the Impala an eyesore? Or the day she started parking on the street and slamming the door just a little too hard? I replayed our arguments in my head, softer and more pleading than I'd remembered. I wondered if I should have seen her frustration for what it was, less about metal and bolts, more about feeling invisible. But then the anger kicked in. She hadn't said a word about how she felt until it was too late for either of us to fix anything. Instead, she'd made the decision for me, written me and the Impala out of her life in one afternoon, and left a crater in both our worlds. Some lines can't be redrawn. The phone calls with my lawyer turned brisk and procedural. Everything he said was about damages and comparable value and evidence, never about regret or loss or how you were supposed to sleep in a house that no longer felt like your own. He couldn't help me with that. I'd watched months evaporate in court filings and statements, each form another stone in the wall that divided who I'd been before all this from the version I was now. I didn't even want to visit friends. The risk of someone whispering about the car guy whose girlfriend snapped was too heavy. It was easier to be alone, easier not to answer when her number flickered across caller ID late at night. Other people called what happened justice, but it felt nothing like the word. Even wrapped in the certainty I'd done what was necessary, I found myself searching for closure that wouldn't come. Part of me wanted her to understand the wound she'd carved, how for me, the Impala wasn't just a project but a trail of memories, sweat, and stubborn hope. But another part whispered maybe she'd always known, and that's why she did it. Maybe resentment can grow until it cracks something inside both people, too deep to bridge. There was no going back, no apology big enough to undo the betrayal. Every time I fantasized about getting the car back, it was painted with phantom regret, every gleam of chrome now tinged with the price of loss. Still, I couldn't shake the doubt. Had I loved the car too much, loved her too little? Or was the flaw buried in both of us, uncompromising, each blinded to what the other truly needed? As each day passed, the house felt emptier but my resolve sharper. I realized the only way forward was through, not around. The lawsuit was moving, and the world would keep spinning whether I broke down or stood up for myself. The aftershocks of her choice radiated into every quiet moment, proof that even the just thing can leave you hollow and unsure. If closure came, it would be slow and hard one, and shaped by every decision I would make from now on. Soon a judge would hear the case, and as the court date approached, it became clear. The final price of justice would be revealed only when it all came to light before someone with the power and the duty to decide who, if anyone, was actually right. I never imagined I'd be sitting in my house, counting down days to a court date, with a garage stripped of everything that once gave it meaning. The weeks since that day at the scrapyard stretched out, every hour weighted with more questions than answers. I kept waiting for some sharp moment of resolution, but it didn't come. Instead, I found myself circling the same uncertainties. Would a win in court actually feel like closure, or would it just highlight what I'd lost? Was this all really about justice, or had it turned into something darker and more lonely than I'd bargained for? The legal machine churned on. My lawyer lined up documents, photo evidence, receipts, everything needed to prove the truth, on paper at least. The Impala itself was still locked behind the impound fence, a battered witness to everything that had gone wrong. The police had managed to recover some of the missing parts, but everything was scattered, some pieces possibly gone for good. I caught myself wondering, if the judge did rule in my favor, how much of that car would ever truly make it home again? Even with money, you can't always put things back the way they were before someone made your world collapse. The people around me made their positions clear. Her family dug in, calling me vindictive, swearing I was destroying her future for a pile of scrap. My own support circle urged me forward, but even some of my friends confessed that the whole thing scared them, how fast a relationship could implode, how thin the boundary can be between love and disaster. Online, the echo chamber of Reddit and car forums echoed all the major arguments: justice, vengeance, forgiveness, practicality. For every person cheering, another called me stubborn, another called her crazy, and some just called the whole story sad. Trust was ruined on both sides. I saw reminders of it everywhere. The empty driveway, the half-repaired fender propped against my wall as a grim memento, the silence where once there was a shared life. In the quiet, I kept replaying decisions, wondering how many steps could have turned out differently. Should I have talked more, listened harder, paid attention to the little resentments before they took over, or was trying to bridge the gap pointless once respect had cracked so deeply? I didn't have answers. There were nights when I almost called her, looking for a fight, or for understanding, or maybe just to hear why. But I never did. Some things, I realized, were as far gone as the parts I'd never see again. The broader lesson felt larger than just my own damage. Everyone online staked out their opinions, on personal rights, on boundaries, on when forgiveness should matter. But the story underneath it all was about the risk of loving something, be it a person or a project, enough to defend it, even when it feels like the whole world thinks you're making too much out of nothing. How much do you sacrifice for peace, and how much do you fight for principles when someone violates the unspoken rules of trust? There were questions I knew would follow me long after the court date. Would I be able to trust someone under my own roof again? Could I ever love a new project with the same single-minded focus, or would I always be looking over my shoulder? Is justice only about punishment, or is it also about reclaiming your voice after someone tries to write you out of your own life? Now, with the hearing looming, I find myself staring at the empty garage and the stillness of the house, wondering what I'll do if I win, or if I lose. Will I ever look at that Impala, scars and all, and see anything but the lines that were crossed and the wreckage left behind? Or is the real restoration not about metal and chrome at all, but about learning where to draw the line between what's worth saving and what was always doomed to rust? That's where I am now, facing a stretch of road where nothing is certain except the need to keep moving forward even when the map is torn. I know I'm not the first or last person to stand on this edge. Maybe that's why I want to know. What would you do? Where is your line between letting it go and standing your ground, even at the cost of everything you thought you built together? The verdict's still out, and maybe, for all of us, the question is never really closed.